Us to be on. Well, welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write great fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky from Central California, and I'm the author of about 40 books. Aaron, quickly, ask me what happened yesterday.
So, Pops, I'm curious, what happened yesterday?
The ebook version of my newest nonfiction came out, and the print version comes out next Tuesday. I'm glad you asked that.
Well, I thought that I remembered something about it. It's almost like I had a vision of it hovering somewhere over your left shoulder. I'm not, is that what's happening there?
It's a publishing miracle.
I thought maybe it was some sort of apparition. For those who perhaps are not streaming live or not following on the YouTube cast, what's the title of the book, and why don't you just tell us a little bit about what it's about?
Okay, for you audio-only folks who can't see the cover, and those who may not know about the book, my last two books have been nonfiction, though I've been in the past writing primarily novels. This is called 30 Events That Shaped the Church. There are 30 key historical events starting from about 2,000 years ago all the way up to the present. And it was a fun book to do, really stretched me and taught me a lot of things about research, but it's a lot of fun. So I'm doing what my publisher would have me do, and that is to tell people about it. And now that we have that out of the way, we can move on. It's the second book. The previous one to this was 60 people who shaped the church. So you got a yin for some history there and some bizarre tales, including the Scopes trial and what really went on with that, and was Bishop Ussher crazy, suggesting that the world was created in 4004 BC? How did he come up with that number? Anyway, there's just a whole bunch of interesting things that are in there. And may I say, you're sounding especially radio-like.
Provocative.
Tonight.
This is.
Well, I don't know about provocative, just radio-like.
I had a fighting off a little bit of a laryngitis. I'm actually on the mend. Friday I was just it was a squeak of a voice. I went into a meeting yesterday, and everybody kind of looked at me and they said, "Is that your sexy whisper?" Yeah, I typically like to pull out the sexy whisper for staff meetings. I think that's the good way to run things. Are you the hard-boiled detective? I said, "Yes, Mr. Green in the garage with the candlestick." So, if I sound different, that's what it is. A little bit of laryngitis I'm fighting off here.
Yeah, 'tis the season for sneezing. Well, Aaron, you come up with a topic for us tonight, and I think what we're going to be doing tonight, if I remember our last conversation, is I'm going to be doing sort of an interview approach because this is not something that I have used, and so I'm interested in seeing the benefits in it and your experience with that, and that is writing prompts. But before we get to that, I do need to remind folks that those of you watching on video, or excuse me, those of you who are audio only, you can see the video of this at Aaron's website, aarongansky.com, and also on YouTube, and you just search for Firsts, that's plural, Firsts in Fiction. And something we started last week, we don't want to forget, just a little short segment of terminology you should ought to know.
Yep, I was going to remind you about that, but there you are. You're on the ball. You got it.
Yeah, it's been an odd day here too. Yeah, last week, what did we talk about? What was our term?
It was over or through the transom.
Over the transom.
Over the transom.
Yeah, throwing a manuscript over the door in a publisher's office and that little window that they used to put over doors. Today is the word leading, L-E-A-D-I-N-G. And it's called leading because it deals with lead. And we've all looked at books, of course, manuscripts. The space between lines, when printed, the printer used to use strips of lead. So if you wanted more space, you had a little wider strip of lead. If you wanted narrow spacing, you had a little narrower piece of lead. And so when they were typesetting using hand placing type, as they used to do, they would put these strips of leading in for the line, and so it came to mean the line spacing between sentences is called leading because it used to really be, well, let's call it lead.
Now, when you say line spacing, are you talking about the space between the lines printed on a page? You said between sentences, so is that like the old school two spaces after a period that you're talking about letting, or are you talking about, I hit double space on my paragraph setting?
No, yeah, we don't double space after periods anymore. If we're using proportional fonts like Times New Roman, that will date you if you do that. And the first thing an editor is going to do is take all those out anyway. So, no, the leading is between the lines on the page. So I appreciate you correcting me publicly and forever on video. It is the space between the lines on the page.
And I just want to remind our listeners that you can subscribe on iTunes to hear me correcting my father publicly on air at least once a week. At least once a week.
At least.
So luckily, though, I never make mistakes. And when I do, I can edit it out. So that's always nice.
Yeah.
But I never do. I never do. So writing prompts today.
Yeah. Tell us what you mean by writing prompts. What is a writing prompt?
A prompt, in much the same way that you would prompt somebody to action, a writing prompt is simply that. It's a call to action for writers. They take several shapes, or specifically two different shapes that I'm thinking of. I kind of categorize them into two groups. Incidentally, there are two types of people in the world: those who group the types of people in the world into two groups, and those who don't. Writing prompts is pretty much the same thing. The first kind would be what I call Kickstarters, and these are good to basically overcome writer's block. You're in between projects, you don't know what your next book is going to be like. Here it is, you've been 3 or 4 days and you've been paying bills and running errands, and you just haven't gotten back to the computer, and your mind is cramped and you don't know what to write about. A lot of times just writing some prompts, so something like, you're in the gas station mini mart when a freak snowstorm hits and you get snowed in for 2.5 days, and imagine that scene, and you start writing this scene from very little details. That's prompting you to action. That's prompting you to write. So that's kind of a Kickstarter. Whereas the other ones are more guided prompts, and these I think are especially useful when you have a work in progress that you're kind of struggling with. You've got a character you don't feel you absolutely understand, and so maybe you're going to do some guided prompts to maybe write some of that character's backstory, which likely will not appear in the book, but it's going to give you, as a writer, a better understanding of who that character is.
So is it mental calisthenics? Is that what we're doing? We're exercising possibilities and ideas and then trying them out?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. It's exercises. With my students, I give them a writing prompt every day, and a lot of times they're fun. A lot of times, especially like I'll give them some poetry ones, and I'll give them some very strict guidelines, and they always rebel and say, "Well, can I change this? Can I change that?" And I say, "No. I want you to challenge yourself. I want you to stretch yourself." Oftentimes, I'll get I'll get students in there who always write in first person exclusively. They've never written a third person story in their life, and I will tell them, you have to write in third person. I don't want to. I'm not good at it. And it's because you never do it. So try it out. Again, it's exercising and stretching yourself and finding out what you can do and trying some things you don't like. I'm going to give a personal example here. My wife and I have a rule with our children. If we cook something for dinner and they look at it and they go, "I don't like that," we say, You haven't tried it yet. Try a bite." And they go, "I don't want to." So we say, "Take a no thank you bite." And they have to say, "Okay, I'll take a bite, and if I don't like it, then I say no thank you." But they have to try it. And in much the same way, there are some things that we as writers don't like to do, but we need to do them to, I think, become a better writer, a stronger writer.
Now, have you utilized this in your own writing, in The Bargain, and the other books that you have coming out this year?
Yeah, I actually have. A lot of the writing prompts that I give to my students I respond to as well. And what I've found is a lot of good things come from them. A lot of stories start to manifest. And so a lot of my flash fiction stories specifically have really developed from some of these writing prompts. And it can be anything. It can be, for example, taking my son into surgery one day when he was a year and a half. Routine surgery, nothing big, but as a father, you're terrified. And so I remember taking him out of the car seat and looking at the car seat and thinking, what if I don't have a kid to put back in that car seat? That was a terrifying thought. And so that actually became a flash fiction story that I wrote. By the way, my son's fine. Everything was, A-okay. But there's that momentary panic or terror, and sometimes it's good to kind of tap into that. It's something that I never thought I could write about is something bad happened to a child. But doing that has helped me kind of overcome that hurdle, and now when I'm writing young adult fiction and I've got teenagers in peril on every page, it makes me, I think, a little more sympathetic, a little more empathetic to some of the emotions and stuff that these people are going through. And I think I'm able to tap into those a little more realistically now in a way that I perhaps would not have been able to if I had not, taken the impetent or the prompt there to write about that particular story.
Yeah, a lot of writers have shared with me that some of the worst things in their life is just fodder for what's going to come up in the next book. And they'll even make notes on it. And of course, part of it is the psychology of dealing with things. It gives you something to do while you have to wait for whoever's in surgery or whatever it is that's coming up with that. So now you've used it personally, and you're teaching it to your students. When you're working on your MFA, did you have to go through some of that?
All the time. All the time. We actually took a class. I wish I still had the notes. I kind of looked for them before this cast, couldn't find them, but there was actually a class on the importance of writing prompts and how to best utilize them. But some of my favorite prompts that I still use to this day came from Brett Anthony Johnston, and when I took a class from him at Cal State San Bernardino. Again, to Antioch, working with some mentors there. Rob Robert specifically would like to start some of his classes with a quick writing prompt, and he would do these to make a point. He would do these to make a point. Sometimes they were uncomfortable points that he wanted to make, but the point was abundantly clear when he did that. And he'd say, I want you to write an exchange of dialogue between two people in this particular situation. So you do, and then he says, now I'm going to change that and pretend that this person A is this person B is that person, and all of a sudden the dialogue took on from something that was pretty commonplace, became very creepy and very unsettling. And he did that to illustrate that tension can exist not only on the page but between the text and the reader. So tension is not always between characters, but a lot of times it's between the reader and the characters themselves.
So in preparation for this, I went online and I just looked up writer's prompts, and I saw a bunch of places that would just, sometimes they were just little digital cards that would say, write about this. I think I saw one that said, you're an insect on the wall, describe what you see in the room. That sort of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, very much like that. Right from the perspective of an animal in a shelter. A good one that I thought was fantastic that Brett Anthony Johnston had our class do was to kind of teach us the value of perspective, was to write from the perspective of a used car salesman who's about to lose his job. If he doesn't make a sale that day, he's walking out the door with a box full of his stuff. And then you get the single mother who's got working two jobs just to make ends meet, and all she needs is like the economy model. So you write this scene, this dialogue between them, where he's clearly trying to upsell her to keep his job, and she's very much trying to only get what she needs. So writing that scene from two different perspectives helps us to understand the character motivation and how that plays out, and again, the tension between the characters, the argument between the characters. Who is it? I think it's Rob Robert said that a scene is two characters telling each other no in really interesting ways, and that's exactly what you have here. And so it gives you that perspective from the different characters. It helps you understand that every character has a motivation when they're on scene. Every character must have a motivation, and their motivations are necessarily going to interact with the motivations of the other characters on scene as well.
Okay, so a little while ago you mentioned two types of prompts, and one of them you mentioned are Kickstarter prompts. that you can use when you're low on ideas. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Writer's Digest has a ton of them, um, and I think they even have it set up to where you can just kind of log in and comment and read people's responses and stuff like that. But they're just simple, almost scene starters, not necessarily novel starters, but scene starters. You wake up shackled to a chair. You don't know how you got there. You hear two voices and you recognize one of them. You break into a late night swim club, or you break into a swim club after hours with a friend of yours. All's fine and dandy until a dead body floats to the surface and it's somebody you know. So these little scene starters kind of kickstart the brain, and if you don't have a current project going on, or if you're in between projects, sometimes it's good to shift gears a little bit, especially. I don't know if you've experienced this, Pops, but when I put a novel to bed, I can't go right back into it because I'm going to miss every mistake that I've made. I need a day, I need 2 days away from that. If I've just finished a novel, there's no way I'm jumping into novel number 2 on the following day. I need a little bit of time, and so one thing that I'll do for myself to keep writing is to try my hand at some short fiction, a flash fiction, a short story, maybe 15 to 20 pages, maybe even 10 pages. But just I need to write something. I know I need to continue to write, but I also need to shift modes in my brain, and I need my brain to expand a little bit because it's been very focused on one particular project. And I think that's kind of like, if we're going back to the exercise routine, is very much, working out your chest and your abs for so long, and now your legs are getting a little bit weak. Let's do some squats real fast. So just to kind of keep everything balanced and keep your skills sharp.
So in a sense, it's what I've often taught as the what if question, where you say, what if this happened? And then you examine it, see if the story's there. You see if your imagination can run a long enough distance with it for it to be a decent short story or a novel. And so you ask, in your case, what if you went to, you snuck into a pool house and found a body? And there have been several stories like that. Is there enough meat there for it? And then, so that kickstarts some of the ideas by using these prompts. And so you just start with anything, or do you have things that prompt your prompts?
The interwebs is a good place to begin. I do have a couple of resources that I think are super valuable to that end, and that's the first one that I'll mention is Making Shapely Fiction by Jerome Stern. And this is a book that I've mentioned several times, but it lists all the typical shapes that stories take: the hero's journey, the unexpected phone call, the bear at the door, juggling, the visitor from out of town. All of these common tropes, the way stories begin, and he breaks them down and he says, "This is how these stories work." And then I'm telling you, after I read that the first time, I wanted to write every one of those scenes. I wanted to write the bear at the door. I did write a juggling scene, which is now a technique that I practice regularly in my writing, and it became the intro scene for a novel that I started to co-write. So that was, I got some distance out of that one. It's a scene that I still use as kind of an example in a lot of my classes, not because it's perfect, but because it really kind of embodies the shape of that particular story. And so that's a great resource, is Making Shapely Fiction. Looking again at Writer's Digest, they have a ton of them up there. You can buy books of writing prompts. Yeah, so that's what I would say in context of resources for that part.
So then, does the writer just sit down and say, I need to come up with some kind of story, or, as you're talking about, there are some of the Making Shapely Fiction by Jerome Stern, but can these prompts come from any place else? I know many of my stories have come from everything from a newspaper to a small thing that happened to me that I made into a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, if your eyes are open, the world itself will prompt you. Life is the best writing prompt, obviously, but I'm thinking specifically of people who are kind of holed up in their offices, and perhaps have chained themselves to the computer so that, I'm not leaving until I write 1,000 words, and they just can't think of what to write. Jump onto Writer's Digest and find something there. But yeah, there are several writing prompts out there that are not necessarily scene starters, but it'll say something like read the newspaper or the current events. And now put yourself into that particular story, or read a couple current events and mix them together. One great writing prompt that is always around is to take two popular movies and squish them together, and what does that world look like? And that's one place where a lot of people get their ideas. I've said before that Twilight is pretty much Romeo and Juliet with fangs. So you take the vampire craze and you put it into Romeo and Juliet's shoes, and that's what we've got. We've got star-crossed lovers, but it's an interesting twist. What would the Little Mermaid look like in an old Western? You can do kind of a genre swap kind of a thing. Those types of things are really interesting too. A popular movie that you've seen, now rewrite the ending. I think a lot of good writing prompts come from that. Reading, looking at art, and thinking to yourself, I can do that better. I think as writers we often have that reaction as, oh, that was great, but I would have done this differently. Well, then go ahead and take that and run with it, and what does that difference look like, and is it pronounced enough that you can make it a project of your own, or is it still too close to the original source material, and those types of things.
Yeah. That's very similar to what is often called high concept, which is used a great deal in the movie business. Where somebody's got to pitch an idea in the movie business, you got to pitch very quickly. If you don't get their attention, the producer's attention right off the bat, then you're not going to get much further. And so some of the examples are given is that mashup you were talking about, putting two movies together. And sometimes it'll sound ridiculous in the beginning of the pitch, but then that gets that prompt into the producer's mind, and they can start seeing things. So my favorite was it's Bambi faces Godzilla, Bambi wins, and that's just the whole concept right there. And then the producer leans back and says, "I like it." Now they're not really talking about Bambi and Godzilla; they're talking about an underdog story, but that gets the idea across. Where you take two things very well known, you squish them together, and see if you come up with something that's very different. That high concept. All right, so now you've talked. Go ahead.
Is that a movie that was produced? This Bambi versus Godzilla? I need to see this.
No, not that I know of. There have been underdog stories where somebody faces someone well, Popeye, the Sailor Man. That's all that is. It's somebody who isn't strong enough to take care of Bluto unless he gets his spinach, but he's got to have the motivation to do that, and so it's always facing the opposition that is much larger and over. In sometimes the magic works, the author, I just lost his name, former attorney Terry Brooks. Thank you.
Terry Brooks. I just Brooks. Quoted from that today.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said the antagonist must always be bigger and badder than the protagonist. It doesn't matter if that's nature, the raging sea, a white whale, or Brutus and Popeye. He always or she always has to be more dangerous than the protagonist can deal with, and so the protagonist must have to grow to overcome the problem. Well, okay, so now you mentioned Kickstarters for when you're low on ideas, getting things started. I'll just share a quick story. Behind me, over my shoulder, you see a Ship Possessed cover, and that story came from just a little clip in a newspaper I read years ago about an old World War II submarine that washed ashore on, I think it was a South Korean, and it had been owned by the North Koreans. Okay, and I just filed that away. And later what it became was the gem for this. That was my Kickstarter, and the gem was there's a World War II submarine that washes ashore 50 years late in the wrong ocean without its crew, but it did not come back alone. And it all came from that little story I had read in a newspaper. Well, talk a little bit, if you would, about the guided prompts. What do you mean by guided prompts?
A guided prompt is one that's a lot more narrow, a lot more specific to what you're doing, to what you're dealing with specifically in whatever project you're currently working on. I look at these as auxiliary scenes that are not going to make it into your novel, more than likely, but it's going to help you to better understand your characters. So I'm gonna flash back real quick to the Ship Possessed, your book, and you've mentioned before, I believe on this podcast, that you had a character in there that you didn't feel was working. And
Yes.
so, how did you fix that?
Well, it started off as a male ensign who was the assistant to Captain J.D. Stanton, and so he was there to help investigate this. J.D. Stanton, retired Navy captain for submarines who the Navy would never let retire, and I don't know how far I was into this book. I may have been 40% into the book, and the relationship wasn't working. And I suddenly realized that the problem was the ensign was not a man but was a woman. So I gave him a quick sex change operation and went back to chapter 1, and every scene where he had been became where she was now, and that made all the change.
First of all, sex change operations in fiction are a lot cheaper and a lot faster and a lot less painful, from what I understand. But right there, I heard two writing prompts. There are probably more in there, but right there, I heard your character is not a man but a woman. What's that look like? Go. And so you write several scenes from the perspective of this character, but now he's not a he, he's a she. How does that affect your story? What does that look like? For you, that was a beneficial change and it made the story work. For others, it may not be that the gender is wrong. They may just realize that perhaps the age is wrong. The gender was correct, but the age is wrong. Whatever the case may be, you'll start to get a better sense, I think, of your character writing these exploratory types of prompts. I also heard you say J.D. Stanton is a retired Navy captain, was
Mm-hmm.
it? That
Right.
could not retire. So, I mean, there's a great writing prompt. Your character wants to retire and can't. By the way, that just so happens to be the plot of The Dark Knight. If you watch that, what does Batman want? He wants to retire. He wants to let Harvey Dent take over and fight the crime, but he can't retire because Harvey Dent is completely and totally inept. And so everyone says the Joker is the antagonist, but it's not. It's actually Harvey Dent who's can't get his stuff together, forcing Batman to stay in the game. And so you kind of see that thing, like what an interesting concept. We've seen Batman fighting villains all the time, but let's if we're going to reboot the Batman franchise, what's an interesting twist we can give him? He wants out. He's human. That makes his character more believable, more realistic, and more empathetic in a lot of ways, because quite honestly, sometimes it's hard to relate to the spoiled rich kid who has all the great toys. But now you've given him some sort of weakness. This has cost him something, and so we get a better understanding, a deeper understanding of this character. And these types of writing prompts can really help to illuminate that. They want to retire, but they can't. Why not? What's keeping them from retiring? Is it themselves? Is it something else? Your character wants to retire, but what is it? What's the one thing that's going to keep him or her in the game? Those are some interesting types of prompts that can kind of get your mind going. Now, of course, your character may not be at retirement age. Imagine what he or she looks like at retirement age and write that scene. It's not going in your novel. That's fine. It's going to help you understand the end game, where your character is going to eventually end up, and that will help you better understand the story arc, the character arc, in a lot of ways.
Right. Right. While I'm thinking about it, those of you who are viewing us live, I noticed Molly Joe was giving us a couple of mashups. Doctor Doolittle on the Titanic. That'd be fun. And she says, I want to write a mashup of Willy Wonka meets Little House on the Prairie, taking these opposites you'd think would never meet, put them together, hit puree on the blender, and see what comes up. So those of you watching us live, if you want to put together a little prompt for us, I'll try to get them into the program as we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially your favorite prompts. If there's one that you've written before that you've had a lot of success with, that's resulted in a good story or a novel idea, drop us a quick comment there in the section and let us know. We'll get that on the air.
I did a flash fiction piece for Splickety magazine. I was asked to write for them, and I had been wanting to write a short story, but the idea came from a set of sounds. Sometimes, if I want to take a little nap or I want to block out the world, I use a thing called white noise on my iPhone, and you can blend different sounds together. So I have one that's water, a wind sound, and I forget what the other one. Oh, it's fire. It's a fire crackling. And for some reason, that created an image in my mind. And the image was of a crashed old military plane in Antarctica with one survivor trying to survive against the cold wind. He's built a fire inside the airplane, and that stuck with me for years until Splickety magazine said, "Hey, you got a short story for us?" And I thought, "Yeah, I got one." And the prompt wasn't anything I read. It was a set of sounds. So that worked out well. Well, take us on the next step now. These guided prompts that you had talked about.
Yeah. You want just some examples of them?
Sure.
A couple that I've used here. This is one that was given to me by Brett Anthony Johnston, and in context of resources, I mentioned Making Shapely Fiction. I do want to also mention that Brett Anthony Johnston has a book called Naming the World that he edited, and what it is, it's a fantastic book for beginning writers, and what it is basically a section by section breakdown of the art of fiction. So he'll talk about character, he'll talk about setting, he'll talk about conflict, and he gives you 3 or 4 pages about what it is, how to establish it, what you need to do to make it work, and then he's compiled a list of, I don't know, 15 to 20 different guided prompts from top-notch writers, some of the best writers in the game, some of their favorite prompts, and he's collected them and he's categorized them and he's put them all together. And it's, as one person says on the back of the book or the front of the book, it's an MFA in one book. It's just a ton of stuff that'll keep you going. And if you're struggling with a project, I highly encourage you to grab it, find out what you're struggling with, be it character, setting, or conflict, or whatever the case may be, and read through some of the prompts. Don't write them all. Ain't nobody got time for that. But pick a couple that you think, yeah, I can do this. I can do this, and this is going to benefit my project in some way. So the first prompt that I want to give you guys, one of my favorites, I have my students fill out a character sketch sheet. And so this is what, virtually every writer does. Your character's name, full name, their date of birth, where they were born, their personality type, their favorite movie, their favorite soft drink, everything that you can possibly conceive of about this character. Write it all down. Their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their educational background, whatever. Write it all down. And once you get it all down, and take some time on this. Don't just give quick answers. Really ask yourself, what is it that I want? What is it this character wants? Once you have that all filled out, this is the big secret. You go back through and you find out which one your character lied about. So the assumption here is that your character has lied. And our initial reaction is, oh, no, our character would never lie to me. I'm the writer. Our characters lie to us all the time. What this does is a couple things. The primary thing that it does is it teaches us that we don't know our characters as well as we think we do. That our characters always have secrets from us. And that if we want to truly know our characters, we need to figure out what those secrets are. And we need to probe, and we need to push, and we prod, and we look in the deep, dark places, because that's where our characters live, is in those deep, dark places that they don't want to talk about. And once you can elicit that information, you're going to understand your characters in a way that you haven't before. And I think what you'll find is it's pretty revelatory, that it may not have massive ripples on the outcome of the book, but it will have some effect. Specifically, the Hand of Adonai series, I just did some character work, and I did something similar. My character has a secret. What is the secret? And worked with my editor on it. We bounced some ideas off each other. I called in the big guns, my alpha readers, They had some stuff to weigh in with, and we came up with an idea that we thought would work. Um, Great backstory, good secret, really helps me understand my character better. I added maybe 5 or 6 lines throughout the entire book. It's 5 or 6, but it transforms the character. Just those 4 or 5 or 6 lines really transforms that character and helps him to pop off the page in a way that he didn't before. Helps him to stand out in a way that he didn't before. Makes him more interesting. And that mystery, even though the reader doesn't know the full story, I, the writer, understand the full story and can give enough information to keep things interesting. So that's one of my favorites there, is
So
Liar.
you're talking about putting a twist in, and this is forcing you to put the twist in even for yourself. It's one thing to say the reader's not going to get this till later. This is the little twist in the tale. But you're saying that as you begin, you go back and you put in a twist that you don't expect just to shake things up.
Yeah, I highly encourage this. I know a lot of you out there are outline writers and you swear by it and you know everything that there is to know before you write word number 1 on page number 1. But if that describes you, I would hope that you would go through this exercise before you actually start writing, and that's fine. You don't have to do it when you're halfway through the book. But I know for me as an intuitive writer, a discovery writer, this work happens, halfway through the book, 3/4 of the way through the book. I've been known to figure out my characters in the last chapter and have to go back and rewrite the whole thing. It sounds like a lot of work, but I'm telling you, it's work I enjoy, and I feel like it's work that if I don't see it coming as an author, there's really not a lot of ways that my readers are going to expect it either. Now, of course, a good writer is going to go back through and do some foreshadowing and some leading up to it, but just enough to keep us going. So it's not a gimmicky. You're not being gimmicky and withholding the information. You're giving enough information, and the mystery is derived from bits and pieces of information. As any clues, like you'd gather clues if you're solving a mystery novel. In the same way, our characters are mysteries, and we need clues about them, but we don't need the whole thing, not right away. So finding out something that your character has lied to you about can really kind of transform the way you think of your characters.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I've been primarily an intuitive writer through my career, though I've done outlining, but I've been primarily an intuitive writer, which is also a discovery writer. And again, I never like to think that all our listeners understand some of the terms. So you mentioned alpha readers. Alpha readers are the people who get the first pass at your book. They read it while it's still being developed, as opposed to beta readers. And an MFA is a Master's in Fine Arts. In our context, it's a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing, such as what Aaron has. As an intuitive writer, we often do the same thing. I think we just leave ourselves open to change. And in one of my earlier books, Through My Eyes, I had a character walk out, and that came about as, given what I know about her now, what I've discovered so far, what would she do at this moment? And the answer is she would walk out. And so she does walk out, and that really bothered me because as an intuitive writer, I don't have the ending figured out yet. Turns out she's the key to solving everything. So maybe it was subconscious. I don't know, but having to be open to those twists, whether you do it ahead of time or just know that they're going to come and you look for those. Bruce Brady's asking, which book did you refer to as the MFA in one book? I think that was Naming the World, Anthony Johnston.
Yeah, Naming the World, Brett Anthony Johnston. Fantastic book. I've got little Post-its hanging out of that book left and right. So for great exercises that I give my students.
Yeah, Bruce, that's last name is Johnston with a T. Brett Anthony Johnston, Naming the World. Okay, carry on there, Aaron. So we understand our characters better. What about things like perspective and voice?
Perspective and voice. I kind of talked a little bit about that with the car lot exercise, and the voice. Trying to nail down the voice. I think a lot of the ways that you can do that, specifically your character voice, is to have them talking. One character I was having trouble figuring out their particular voice, and I don't even recall what exercise I was doing, but I was writing from his perspective. He ended up saying "bro" at one point, And I thought, oh, okay, so this is the guy who says bro. Now his entire vocabulary is unlocked, and I understand how this character speaks, or at least presents himself to other people. And so it's a verbal tick that I gave him, and I encourage that, trying to find those verbal ticks that people have, because it will set them apart. Another advantage is you don't have to always say he said, she said. Whenever you see the word bro, there's only one character in my book who says it, and it's going to be, it's going to be Aiden. And so that's a good thing. I like having people have an argument. One of the things that we do as writers, is we tend to have people get in arguments, and then whatever side we hold is the side that wins the argument. But I truly wish I could remember the name of the person who said it, but they said the sign of a good writer is to have two people arguing about something that you're passionate about, and the reader can't decide which side you're on. We tend to, if we're going to have people debating the morality of I don't know, the upcoming presidential election, we'll say, they're going to talk about that, and you support one candidate, and you're going to have your character win with all the great points, and they're just going to smash the competition and see, haha, I win. But as a reader, that's super uninteresting, and if I can come up with a counter argument that the character doesn't come up with, then I'm really upset that this character is so dumb and hasn't figured that out. So challenge yourself and try and let your characters have disagreements, and don't take sides. Let them both have good points. Let them both have, agree to disagree, whatever it is. Explore that, and what you'll do then is not only challenge yourself and your own thinking, but you're going to understand the characters and their perspective in a way that you hadn't before, which I think is vital, because if every character that we write about has the same beliefs as us, every character is going to be the same, and there's not going to be any sort of diversity, or there's going to be no character dynamics, and that's going to be kind of boring to read for your audience. And so, champion somebody who has a different opinion than you. Even if it's something small, oftentimes I'll have characters that just love canned spinach. They love it. I can't stand the stuff.
Just like you do.
Oh my! Ooh. I've got a canned spinach story. It's not fit for air.
Okay, we'll save it. But yeah.
Yeah, but the idea is that distinguishes the character from me, and so now I've got to challenge myself as a writer to find a way to write about canned spinach so it sounds appetizing, which to me is the worst writing prompt ever. And I would immediately say, no, I want a different writing prompt, or can I change the food? No, the reason the writing prompt is good is because I don't like canned spinach, and so now it forces me to stretch a little bit, and we need to stretch as writers. So the arguments, the disagreements, and supporting one side or the other, I think those are valuable for perspective.
All right. Okay.
I was going to give one other character developing one that I've used, and this actually made its way into. I'll tell a couple more quick stories in context of guided prompts, but the other one that I really like is, what is the worst thing your character has ever said? And then write the scene. Try and avoid the cliche, I hate you, I wish you were never born, whatever. Those are all pretty easy to get to. But really take a while and dig deep. Find out what is the worst thing your character has said, and what's the situation that causes that. I did that as an exploratory scene, but it actually made its way into one of the opening scenes of my Hand of Adonai book, which is set to release this year. I think it's one of the most powerful scenes in the book, and you immediately understand the character in a way that you hadn't before. And you don't necessarily like her, but you understand her, and I think there's some power in that. Another thing that I did is I like to give my characters secrets that I don't know. One of my characters in the Hand of Adonai series is named Erica, and she wears gloves. And I knew she wore gloves. And I knew what kind of gloves she wore. And I knew that she never took them off. And I had no idea why. But that carries throughout the entire series. And once you find out, the reveal, once I realized as a writer, no spoilers here, once I realized why she wore those gloves, it transformed that character for me, and everything clicked, and I understood her. And those who have read the book, my alpha readers, my beta readers, hands down, they all say that she's their favorite character. She's got the most depth. She seems to be the most dynamic, and she's just really fun. Whenever she's on scene, it's an enjoyable read. A lot of that came from giving her a secret, and I knew going into it that I didn't understand my character, and I was totally comfortable with that. I was looking forward to figuring it out as much as the reader is looking forward to figuring it out. So sometimes having your character lie to you, giving your character a secret that you don't know going into it, having them defend a position that you don't think should be defended, these are all things to kind of draw a line between you as an individual and your characters, and I think that's an important distinction to make.
Oh, good stuff. To those watching live, if you have any questions, now would be a good time to post those, and we'll try to get those answered here in the time that we have left. Well, this has been interesting for me because I've not learned to do it this way. I seldom just sit down and start writing something as a way of exercise. I have a few times even acted out a scene if I couldn't get the physical movements in mind, and that's when you close all the curtains and then you act out the scene in the living room. I've only had to do that a couple of times, but because I couldn't get it clear in my mind. Not necessarily a prompt, but it did prompt solutions for me. And I've also found prompts, as I said, come from just about anywhere. I've had a piece of paper hit the side of my car, and because of the wind down where you live blows constantly, it stuck to the car, and I thought, oh, man, I wonder what would happen if I saw a picture of my son on that, and then the thing blows away. And, that's clearly not a good picture, something bad happening, perhaps.
It would likely be a wanted poster.
Yeah, it could have been that.
If it's my face, it's definitely a wanted poster.
Photo of you rifling through my wallet or something like that.
Yeah. But you make a good point. And I'll just add in here, I don't mean to cut you off or to interrupt here, but I would say this, that as a writer, one thing that you can do is write that down. Like you say, there are several that have hit you, that have stuck with you in the back of your brain, that took you years to kind of get around to actually writing. However, I would encourage you to write those down, and then they become classroom exercises, because as writers, we often teach writing, and we're always talking with other writers, and to throw it out there and to challenge other writers and say, hey, this just happened. This made me think about this. What do you think of it? How would you handle this? And then it gets their brains going.
Yeah, I taught in Indianapolis at a college there for just a short segment. They have a little term up there at Taylor University, and I was teaching writing suspense, and I gave them the assignment. This is the fun part about teaching college, because they have to work, they have to write. And it came from an experience of mine. I'm flying on small planes, commercial planes, where there's only one stewardess, and she's facing you, you're facing her, and I wondered, what would she see if the plane started to go down? And then I just filed that away. And then I've started using it in teaching, and I gave it to all these students here, and I said, okay, this is what you have. I want to know about the person, and I want to know what she sees as the plane goes down, and then what happens after that. And there was like 25 totally different ideas. Lori's mentioned something. That's Lori Stanley Roeleveld, whose new book, I think, is just out. If that's true, Lori, give me the name of the book again, prompt my memory, and we'll mention it here. But she says, I like to take a group of my characters to the gym or play a casual game of sports. What equipment do they choose? Are they competitive? How do they respond to competition? Does someone with less relational power have more in that setting? More power in that setting? How do the others respond? What do you think about that as a prompt?
That's fantastic. First of all, that's the only way that I would ever get into a gym is, in fiction. But what I love about that specifically is the fact that you're putting your character into an actual physical body, and you're letting their body move. And biologically, we tend to think of our characters a lot in their psychology, but very little in their biology and what it actually feels like to be inside their skin, to feel their muscles moving, to feel the ache of the knees when, because they tore their ACL and all this kind of stuff. We tend to forget to describe those moments in our characters, and I love that putting your character into some sort of physical action will get you to understand their biology as much as their psychology. So I'm super in love with that. I also love the fact that she says, how much relational power do they have? This is something Stephen James talks about with character status, right? You're at work and you're the boss, and you say jump, and people say how high, and then you come home, and your wife says jump, and you say yes, dear. How quickly would you like me to jump? Because your status is changing, and so that idea of relational power is key. And that struggle for relational power, right? In our little circles of friends, who's the dominant one? Who's the subservient one? When does that change? Does it ever change? What is the character willing to change it for? There's another great prompt. If you've got a subservient character, put them in a situation where they become the dominant one. What is it that they care enough about that they're going to, for the first time perhaps in their entire lives, put their foot down and assert themselves and say, no, we're going to do it this way? That's a very powerful scene to write. So there's a lot of great things happening in that particular prompt. So great job with that, Lori. I'll also say one of my favorite writing prompts. This is the prompt that really, I wrote my first good poem based on this prompt, and it was, imagine engaging in a sport, some sort of competition with your father, if he were your same age. And so I wrote this poem called Chasing My Father, and it became one of my better poems. And at the end of the class, my professor pulled me aside, and he said, this is clearly your best work. You've taken some huge strides here. It's not a perfect poem by any means, but that was the first poem I wrote that he actually said, yeah, good job. And it's because I think the prompt was so powerful in a lot of ways, because you've got two people who are in a relationship engaging in some sort of physical activity, and there's automatically going to be some sort of relationship there, and you get to know people in a way that perhaps you didn't before. So high marks. A+, Lori, A+.
And her book, by the way, is Running from a Crazy Man, and Christian book, Running from a Crazy Man and Other Adventures Traveling with Jesus. And I believe it's just now out or just about to come out. So congratulations to her on that, and the great work she's doing on her blog. Bruce Brady says, seems we're learning about writing from an unhealthy, wanted criminal. I love being a writer. Molly Jo does have a question. She says, are there certain prompts or writing ideas you would avoid?
That is a fine question. Of course there are always the ones that are distasteful to us that we tend not to want to write. But I also feel like those can be the most powerful ones in a lot of ways, and we can learn the most from them. So I've learned to be very to trust the prompts, even if they seem kind of lame, even if they seem kind of trite or cliche. There's still something to be learned, and I think going into the prompt, I think it's the attitude that you take into the prompt. If you take your attitude in where you're not going to learn anything, this is dumb, and you drag your feet and your heels and you just don't want to do it, you're not going to get quality work. But if you look at it and you go, meh, not my thing, I never write westerns, but I'll do it because maybe I learned something. I mean, what is Star Trek, the original series, except for a western with phasers? It's a western in space, and maybe you don't
Wagon
like
train,
westerns.
The producer, Gene Roddenberry, called it Wagon Train in Space. That was when we talked about doing the mashup, putting two things together. So what if you take a western like Wagon Train and you put it in outer space? And we think, well, that sounds like a dumb idea. And it turned out to be Star Trek, and how many series and movies have been made from it? So,
and nerds. How many nerds have been made from Star Trek? Don't forget that.
Quite a few. That would be moi. I don't know how you say nerd in French, but it would be moi.
Yeah.
I'd be remiss, Ann Mulligan, if you're still with us. freshen my memory about your bonnet, and I'm interviewing you next week on Writers Talk. I have it. For the life of me, I can't think of it. I can see the cover. Her husband did the cover, painted the cover. He's a fine artist, and that was kind of interesting. So, Ann, if you're still with us, tell us about your book that just came, or give me the name of your book that just came out, and so we can share that.
And does she have a website? I'm sure we could maybe look it up real quick.
Oh, yeah, she does. Had I known I was going to be doing this, I'd have had all that information available. Well, let's just do this. Those that are listening or those that are watching, hers is Ann Mulligan, Ann with one N, A-N-E, Mulligan. She has a new novel out, and those wanting to look up Lori Stanley Roeleveld, that's Lori with an I, Stanley, and then Roeleveld is R-O-E-L-E-V-E-L-D. Google that, and you will end up in the right neighborhood.
I gotta say, I've had the privilege of doing a little team writing with Lori. I'm a huge fan of her work. She's fantastic. Just a quality writer. You can learn a lot from taking her sentences apart and how she phrases language and her use of description. And what I really like about her is she doesn't shy away from topics. She'll tackle it straight on, and there's, again, a lot of power and value in that for us to not be afraid of going to those deep, dark places and imagining what those deep, dark places hold. We learn a lot that way, and so kudos to you, Lori. I've not had the privilege of reading Ann Mulligan, so I can't speak her up as much, but Pops, you've had some...
Yeah, she leads, she, along with Gina Holmes, leads a blog of published authors, Novel Rocket, novelrocket.com. Started off as Novel Journey by Gina Holmes, and then it became Novel Rocket after Gina was published and the like. By the way, Dave Fessenden, does that ring a bell with you, that name?
I feel like he might be my agent, so yes.
So he owes you money.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's with us. He says he's with us. He says there is a cartoon on YouTube, Bambi Meets Godzilla. He says it's hilarious, so I'm guessing that's a thumbs up on that.
Yeah. And
all right, Aaron, we're coming up on our time here.
Just real quick, Lori has come to our aid. Chapel Springs Revival and
yes.
Mulligan. Yeah. Did you already say that?
No, I was getting to it, but yeah, it's Chapel Springs Revival. I knew that too. I've got the book and I've got all the information and stuff, but it's been a long day.
It has been a long day.
And I'm old.
And
so.
But you've got a voice. So
that's true, though it doesn't feel quite right either. But anyway, I do.
Yeah.
With that. Alrighty, well, I'm going to throw it back to you, Aaron, unless you have any more you want to share with us. I will say this, the resources that Aaron has mentioned in this episode of First in Fiction is Making Shapely Fiction, a book by Jerome Stern. Mm-hmm. Making Shapely Fiction, a book by Jerome Stern, and Naming the World by Brett Anthony Johnston, with a T.
Mm-hmm.
So those are there. And, I see we have Jack Kavanaugh with us, too. So,
oh, boy.
Yeah, I didn't see him on the list there, but that's great.
This is fantastic. This
is
fantastic. So, absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us. Before we go, do you want to give a quick mention of what we're handling next week? What are we handling next week? I'm looking it up right now.
I told you it was a long day, and
self-made rules.
Self-made rules. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Let me do the radio voice here. Okay, so stay tuned with us. Join us again next week as we talk about self-made rules that writers make for themselves. Glad you looked that up quickly.
I could probably.
And thank you to all who joined us live. We got what a group here: Bruce and Jack Kavanaugh, and Dave Fessenden, and Lori Stanley Roeleveld, and that was a lot of fun. You made the show a lot better.
Absolutely.
Aaron?
Well, again, you can always find us on aarongansky.com, YouTube, iTunes. We're always there. They can find you, Pops, at altongansky.com. And thank you all for listening. Appreciate you being here. Hope to see you again next week. And until then, good writing.